to tell you briefly about ShrinkSync, and then I'd like to introduce our presenter for today is Nikki Godfrey. So a little bit about ShrinkSync. We are a digital networking hub for therapists. It's a great way to network and be able to refer clients out and receive clients to help you build your practice. And of course, we bring to you our monthly webinars, and it's open to, if you're interested in ever presenting, just let us know, and we'd like to help promote our ShrinkSync community members in sharing their wonderful wisdom and knowledge with others. So for now, what I'd like to do is introduce Nikki Godfrey. And once our webinar is done for today, know that the evaluation will be sent to you as soon as you sign off as soon as the webinar ends. So make sure you complete the evaluation so that we can then email you your CEU certificate for today. I'm very happy to introduce Nikki Godfrey. She's someone I've known for some time and highly respect in our field. During Nikki Godfrey's long-time practice in the San Fernando Valley, California, she has specialized in crisis and trauma recovery, life transitions, and adolescent and adult survivors on incest and abuse. Additionally, and more recently, Nikki has been helping parents manage the often overwhelming issues of parenting adult children. In this capacity, she's assisted parents and children to understand their relationships. Her postgraduate professional training includes advanced certification in critical incident stress management, chemical dependency, and certification as a Gestalt therapist. Nikki serves on the disaster mental health team of the American Red Cross LA and on CAMP's Crisis Response Network. Within the San Fernando Valley chapter of this network, she chairs the Post-Action Outreach Subcommittee. Ms. Godfrey is a parent of 2 adult children and grandparent of 4 grandchildren, one of whom is an adult. Please help me welcome Nikki Godfrey.
Thank you, Anita. I'm really pleased to be here and very happy to be sharing this material with you. I'm going to start by going over the description that you received concerning today's webinar because I think that this will set the tone for what we're going to be talking about. You know, sometimes parents look at this information and they say, oh, you know, this is just something about taking care of your aging parents, but it clearly is not. It's really more about taking care of yourself when your children are grown and understanding how things are going to be different. Because a new parenting chapter is created when our children become adults. This change is really a lot larger than we expect, and it necessitates transitions for the entire family that can be really exciting, and that's often what we expect. But what we don't expect is that, or we don't usually expect, is that it also can become quite bewildering and disappointing. So in this presentation, we'll explore the dilemma that when we imagine that parenting would end when the kids are chronologically adult versus the reality that nowadays parents often end up with more complicated situations that require expanded awareness and different thinking. And it's this awareness and different thinking that we will be focusing on. We'll identify the various stages of life transition markers that present challenges when parenting adult children. And these markers, by the way, are for the children as well as the adult parents. And some of the most common challenging situations. And then we'll talk about traditional parenting concepts that can be reframed. And lastly, we'll distinguish the separation issues for the parents and for the adult children and identify ways to address them. I'd like to say something first. By the way, I do want to say that what we won't cover in this presentation is some of the more complex issues of dysfunctional families or highly emotionally charged situations like alienation or drug and alcohol addiction or mental health illness and some of those more complex things. That's for a whole other situation. Not another situation, but another discussion. I want to say that how I got into this area, and I do want to pay some respect to my colleagues that are really co-creators of this information, Charlie Lehrman and Yolanda Nowak and Marcia Spike. We are in a consultation group with a few other people. It's a multidiscipline group where we meet weekly and we discuss cases and help each other with some of the challenging issues that we come up against. And we began to find that when we were talking about parenting issues and parents came in and their children were already grown, some of them were out of the house already, some of the traditional parenting techniques that we learned as therapists and used as therapists were really not working. So this is how we developed this material. And by the way, aside from all of us being really highly skilled, experienced therapists, but all of us are parents of adult children. So this has helped too. And we started out by doing presentations, which were more psychoeducational presentations on parenting adult. And find that the parenting issues needed to be divided with the different life transition times in a child's life, and that we couldn't have a heterogeneous group, but of attendees to our presentations. They really needed to be divided by these life transition markers that I'll mention shortly. And then we found that some of them became so difficult that we had to, we started seeing people individually or conjointly in sessions. So parenting, birth to 18 years. This basically involves skills related to nurturing, protecting, and guiding. Of course, the children are highly dependent on us, and as they get less dependent on us, we still remain the center of our child's world. But this diminishes as the children grow older, and it requires continuing separation between the parents and the child. So when we get to the stages of parenting, age 18 and beyond, these are the life transition markers that are really obvious, starting with high school graduation, and of course for some, college. I still remember hearing my granddaughter when she graduated from high school and had turned 18, she was saying to her mother, "You can't tell me what to do anymore, I'm 18. Some of you who have grown children, that may be a familiar sound. Anyway, but some people might argue that once they graduate from high school, they're really not adults yet. But and that's mostly because they are still, for the most part, financially dependent on us. But we still have to set clear, different kinds of boundaries in terms of dealing with this. And I like to think of it more as a transition time and kind of a practice time. And of course, if they go off to college, that may extend it even more. And the socioeconomic reality these days is that with the cost of things being what they are and more people going on to college and so forth, that adolescence technically lasts longer than it used to. But then from there, they might be out on their own, or they may be they're starting their careers, or maybe they're entering or not willing to enter family businesses if that's something that's going on in a family. The next stage would be partnering, and that includes weddings, and in-laws come into play. And sometimes, sadly, divorce may be part of the mix. And then following, if grandchildren come along, that sets up a whole new issue and different relationships and somewhat sort of parenting relationships between the grandparents and the grandchildren, but really not the same as between the parents and the children. And then sometimes when parents can't maintain their ability to adequately parent their children, there's the issue of grandparents as parents. And then lastly, things like wills, trusts, and family businesses. So parents may anticipate that when their children are grown, that their life, the parent's life, would be easier or more carefree, or that their family would be expanding. The one certainty that does happen with this is that with the children reaching adulthood is that the family is changing and will continue to change. And in this context, I'm going to offer you the top 10 challenges facing parents of adult children. I do want to say that I do believe that for the most part, people will want to keep the family together, and it's how we can keep the family together, but keeping it together differently, that this is what the focus of what we're talking about today. So with some deference to David Letterman when we talk about the top 10 challenges, but I also, the caveat is that this was not a scientific study, and it's not necessarily in order of importance or appearance, but it's things that we, my colleagues and myself, have discovered in talking about not only our own lives, but in talking with our the cases and the clients that we deal with. So starting with advice that backfires, and I will end my talk with saying something about advice that backfires. Next is the money issues, and I'm going to focus a little bit on that one more today because that's something that I've done presentations on already as well. Education and career choices. One of my office, she has said often that she is amazed at how often she sees parents determining what major their children, their college student children, will be following. And then there's lifestyle and value changes. You know, things are really different. Some of the things that I might have thought or would have liked to say to my parents growing up, I would never do. Compared to some things that my children say to me these days and what I hear other children say. There's a difference in the socioeconomic standing of the adult children from what the adult parents are and so forth. So these lives, and the thing that stands out the most for me right now too is that, you know, in my day, one would never think of having a child before they were married, and this seems to be more the norm today than others. I have a dear friend who's from Europe, and her nieces and nephews are all grown and have children, but apparently in Europe, I guess they don't believe that much in marriage, or at least with the socioeconomic group or the country that my friend's nieces and nephews are from. So that's just an example of some lifestyle and changes. Then there's partner and marriage choices. This is another really very thorny issue that can happen. We don't have control over that. I remember many years ago, we got our first pedigree dog, a golden Labrador, and we decided we were going to breed her and make a little money, or we thought we would. I remember the absolute joy when we got to go to the breeder and actually pick her mate. And we both looked at each other and we said, boy, we'll never get to do this with our daughters, so we better enjoy this now while we can. And then, of course, following marriage and partner choices, there's such a thing as in-laws that have to be dealt with. And the phrase outlaws I've heard used, I think, which sometimes is really descriptive of what it can be sometimes. And then sometimes there's the issue of divorce, which can loom really large, because in divorce, typically, it's the whole family gets divorced, not just the couple. And that's the adult family as well as the children of the divorcing couple. And then there's grandchildren, which I said something about that previously. And of course, in terms of the need for separation and individuation, there's the issue of letting go. And that can be so insidious sometimes and sometimes really difficult. And lastly, boomerang kids, which is probably something that's very common these days. And the boomerang kids can come in any one of the life stages that we talked about previously. So when children become adults, it's different on so many levels. And it can create a significant sense of loss, conflict, and pain. And if the parents don't accept this loss, then their ability to move on and continue as a family will be compromised. So I think that this is really crucial, and I hope that you can remember that, because that's really what we're going to be dealing with, is dealing with the loss and the conflict and the possible pain, and sometimes that's what can actually bring people into therapy, and they might need more than a psychoeducational presentation. All right, so what are some of these losses? There is the loss of status. You're no longer the center of your child's life. They don't really need you in the same way that they did when they were younger, even in the same way that they did when they were adolescents. There's the loss of control or the authority that you had with your children. It's kind of like, I like to think of it as a one up and one down before they're 18, and it starts to get more equal. Your kids no longer have to listen to you telling them what to do. And the reality is, if you think about this, you probably didn't want to listen to your parents either. Who does? And then there's the change in values that may be different than yours. They may be racial or religious changes, socioeconomic changes, as I mentioned before, career choices, and partner choices. There's the loss of intimacy, especially when the adult child selects a partner. This may not be somebody that you have wanted for your child, or you may really do like your child's partner that he or she selected, but that partner tends to become more important to them than you, and that's a loss. There's the loss of hope when the parents' expectations of what they wanted for their children doesn't materialize. I think we tend to see this a lot when there's like a family business and the children decide that they really don't want to go, the adult children don't want to go into the business. Or they can't manage the business the way that you had hoped for them. And then there's also the loss of harmony between the adult parents. And this can happen sometimes when there are problems that arise and the adult mother and father don't see the solutions or the managing it in the same way, and sometimes it can become really difficult. I think this usually shows up a lot in money issues. So it's helpful for parents to pay attention to their sense of loss and the meaning of that loss for them, because this could even develop into a crisis, especially if alienation results, and it can. And I remember years ago, another sweet mate of mine at that time was talking about a lot of the adults that she was seeing was saying that there's such dissension between them and their adult children, and she was beginning to think it was becoming epidemic. And we often talked about this and wondering what this was all about. And when I think about it now, some of the things that I'm sharing with you today really can be at the root of some of this alienation. And it can be really sad, especially when grandchildren come along. There is a crucial need to address the issues of separation and individuation for both the parents and the adult children, with a recognition of the contextual meanings for all concerned. And I do want to say that to summarize a little bit, what I've been saying to you, it starts with recognizing the loss and the conflict and some of the pain for you. And then when you can address that, then the need to look at the ways that you need to separate and individuate for yourselves. And the necessity for that is kind of the order that this is going in. What I'd like to do now is I would like to read to you a vignette that we developed that I think deals with the issue of money. And I will say something about it right now. Money, as I mentioned, is one of the challenges, and it's one of the more encompassing and complex issues when dealing with adult children. And I'll only touch on some of the key points of this. It's a very complex and sometimes even convoluted issue, and it requires a lot of careful consideration. When dollars pass between the generations, it becomes very complex and has many more meanings and uses, and I emphasize uses, for both the parent and the adult child. Some of them are support and help, security, love, control and manipulation, a way to express disappointment, a way to punish, a way to induce guilt. It's a source of tension, and it can be a symbol of favoritism between siblings. You may have some more meanings that you could add to this, and feel free to do that. Money has much more moral and emotional significance because it has the power to wound people, and in the context not only of the present, but the past, the future, and you may even think sometimes from the grave. The most difficult issue is to be able to discuss money, but if it's not said, then it has the power to stay a constant elephant in the room for all concerned. Adult kids may feel ambivalent or ashamed of accepting money, or they may feel entitled to accept the money or to have the money. And sometimes they often follow through with this. I think recently there was a case that I saw on television of an adult child that was suing her parents for the cost of her college education. And I don't know if that, I think she won, but I'm not sure what the reason was that she won. So we're making a plea here also for, talking about money, which is difficult. For those of you therapists, I know in my practice, sometimes I find it more difficult to talk with my clients about money than to talk about sex. Now, sometimes, as I said, I'm pointing out that there are these different meanings for both the parents and for the adult child, and we have to consider the context of this. So I'm going to read to you this little vignette, as I said, that we developed, and I think this kind of touches on some of the main points. Ellen and Rich's son, Mike, recently married Emily. The elder couple were happy about the marriage, and about a year later, Ellen and Rich, out of desire to help Mike and Emily get a head start, they lovingly gave them money for a down payment on a house. Shortly after Mike and Emily had moved into the house, Rich and Ellen visited, and to their great dismay, they discovered that the house was painted a strange color orange. The elder couple thought the house was an eyesore. They felt embarrassed and angry, and they were concerned about how this new paint job would affect the property value of the house. And they generally believed that their gift, which was probably an implied condition, had not been appreciated. Having difficulty containing their strong reactions, they awkwardly shared their thoughts and feelings with the younger couple. Mike and Emily didn't really protest, so they obviously didn't discuss it, but soon the relationship between the two couples became more formal, the phone calls less often, and the invitations to visit less frequent. However, Ellen and Rich were able to begin to get some help by reflecting on the meanings, the hopes, and the expectations not only for themselves, but for their children, Mike and Emily. What they didn't initially consider was this really a gift? It actually had implied conditions that were not discussed because they obviously expected that their children, Mike and Emily, would realize that there was a resale value that had to be considered. They were angry when they saw that the house was painted orange. They had expectations, which goes along with conditions, that didn't pay attention to, that they didn't pay attention to. The older couple, Ellen and Rich, actually didn't pay attention to the expectations until they saw the house painted orange. They didn't pay attention to them, and it wasn't discussed with the younger couple as well. The younger couple didn't openly share their reactions. Ellen and Rich seemed unappreciative of Mike and Emily's desire to express themselves and choose a color of their liking. And also that since it was their house, they thought that they had a right to choose the color that they wanted. And I think that, in some sense, Emily and not Emily, the elder couple, didn't pay attention to that. It was when they gave the gift that it technically really became the younger couple's house. So this created confusion as to whose house this was, and their implied criticism of the younger couple's color choice was demeaning. So now we come to managing the new parenting, or I like to call it the non-parenting, because if you look in the dictionary definition of a parent is to nurture and protect. But think about this, as we said earlier, when we talked about the kind of parenting that is necessary before your child becomes 18, it's very different. You don't have to nurture and protect, but you need to develop some style and some agreement with yourselves as the parent and with your adult children is how that's going to be. And remember, I said it's more of an equal kind of situation, so you need to look at each other in that way. Being a Gestalt therapist, of course, my goal is always to stay more present because that's where the change is happening. So starting with staying more present, I'm going to start with distinguishing between expectations and hopes. And this was implied in the vignette that we just read. Expectations tend to imply conditions. And when you think about the word imply, it doesn't, when we're implying things, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to talk about them. But it does nonetheless imply that there are conditions, and this can lead to angry feelings. These are difficult emotions to deal with because you tend to feel angry when your expectations are not met. However, hopes, which is more of an idea that you have, and they don't have the conditions necessarily that expectations do, but when hopes are not realized, they often lead to disappointment and sadness, which is a more debilitating kind of emotion than anger. So next, it's important to be aware of how the meanings differ for each person involved and how the individual contexts color these meanings. Next, be aware of what frustrations the parent is bumping up against and how they are keeping themselves stuck. What power they actually have. In other words, often when I'm working with the adult parents, I help them to pay attention to they may want to change their child's behavior, but that's something that they can't do, and much less so when they are adults than when they're young children. So I work on looking at what power they have and how they can change their own behavior. Next, we have that the parents need to pay attention to what they want and distinguish their needs from those of their adult children and even their grandchildren when they are responding. Things like career choice, and talk about what the parents' needs. I talk about a couple, and by the way, when I give client examples, I'm sure you realize that I do keep the confidentiality, and I change some of the facts to mask the identity of the people I'm talking about. But I worked with a young couple, and they married shortly after college graduation. And the groom's family were all attorneys, and there was a law firm that was staffed by and owned by the family of the groom. And they fully expected that after graduation, the young man would go on to law school and eventually join the family law firm. But it turned out that he wasn't interested in that. In fact, they had moved out of town and for the wife to pursue her career. And he just found that he wasn't getting into law school. He wasn't, taking his LSATs, and he just really was not really interested. And I was working with the young couple and helping them to realize, to be able to feel more supported by what their choices were and what their needs were, and then to talk to the parents from that. I don't know what they eventually did with the parents, but he went into a whole different field. He went into construction because he really liked building houses and so forth, and actually eventually did go on and get an MBA, which helped him in building his construction business. And I'm assuming that eventually the parents came around to accepting that. They finished their therapy, and I didn't get to that part of what happened in the family. So what emotional issues are involved? And this is, of course, part of the alienation. I'm sorry, not part of it's part of the context. some of the issues that come up are attempts to heal the alienation that may be developing between the parents, and may be trying to fix that, and some of the moves that they make. There may be competition with the in-laws of their child. Who's the better parent, who's the better grandparent, or the adult child's partner. There is often competition with the adult child's partner, because remember I said we talked about that loss of intimacy, and that when the partner, and rightfully so, becomes more the center, or the preferred person in your adult child's life, this can be difficult. Some of the unfinished business with the parent's own childhood. Again, a while ago I was working with a woman, and she was really having a lot of difficulty with the relationship with her adult child. And the way that she was communicating with him, he was really, she was trying to talk with him and establish some kind of relationship, and he just kept rejecting her and rejecting her. And we talked for a while, and I talked with her about some ways that she was communicating that I thought might be a little bit helpful. And I tried to explain to her that there was some individuation, it seemed to me, that was taking place with her adult child, and she was having a lot of difficulty with that. And she was like resisting a lot of the things that I was saying. And when I started exploring with her, she started to get tearful, and she realized that what she was doing with her child was something that had not been done with her, and which had caused her great pain, that she had spent most of her life covering up and not even being aware of for herself. And so then we worked together on some of her own issues with finishing the business for herself with her own childhood, which had a lot of abandonment in it. And then she was able to then work more with her son and establish a better relationship with him. So as I said, to reiterate, when these emotional issues are involved, they can be very, very powerful. And often these emotional issues get buried because we don't want to feel them, they're too painful, but they always come out, because I really believe this, that we can lie to the world, we can lie to ourselves, but we can't lie to our bodies. And they will bring this out in therapy when that comes up, or even if you're not in therapy, they often rear their head when you get to the place in your life with your children that was where the trauma was, or the crisis was for you as a child. We call it unfinished business. Okay, I want to add two bullets that are not on here, and one is, of course, I do a lot of work with communication skills. Pretty much a lot of communication skills that we use in conjoint therapy with adults and couples work and so forth. This can be really, really helpful, especially reflective and active listening, and see how that works. And then it's important to also take the time to consider what you like and admire about your adult child, because sometimes especially when angry feelings come in, you get really focused, and we have been focusing a lot on some of the negative things, the difficult things. But I find this sometimes when I do the psychoeducational presentations, I usually like to hand out 3x5 cards, and I ask the people in attendance to write down something that they really admire about their adult child, something about the way that they're conducting their life, or something, a talent that they have, some successes that they've had, and I focus on that word admire, because that can help bring back some sense of appreciation and some joy in doing this. So it's also very helpful to understand that your child, what your child is doing, may be a necessary push for the independence that they need to be making. I don't think you want children to be dependent on you for the rest of their lives. I think what we want is for our children to be able to function on their own. I know certainly something that I want for my children, and do appreciate that about them. So now, what I promised, I'm going to give you advice about advice. Advice without permission is often insulting. Thus, it inhibits nourishing connection. This is where advice really is not only a challenge, but it really falls apart. And we tend to give advice because when we're still feeling stuck in the old ways of parenting, the parenting that was necessary, we want to give direction, especially, when your children are doing something that you could see is headed in the wrong direction, like when Emily and Mike painted their house orange. Ellen and Rich wanted to really tell them, no, you can't do that. That's going to ruin the resale value of the house. But I guess Ellen and Rich, Emily and Mike weren't ready to sell their house, and they were just really more in touch with their aesthetic desires at the time. But you saw that by giving, there was implied advice in the way that they dealt with it initially with the younger couple, and you see some of the effects. So we do want to keep the family for the most part going, and so don't give advice. And I point to the Bible. You know what happened when God told Adam and Eve not to eat the apple. They didn't listen to him, did they? So lastly, I want to focus on the parents' individuation. When we are in crisis, or even when we're traumatized, as painful as that may be, what's at the other end of the crisis is an opportunity to grow and make changes that can be helpful. So what does this mean? You will have more time, presumably. Of course, unless there's some extenuating circumstances. But without having to do all this nurturing and protecting, you have time to appreciate your children, to get along with them, hopefully on some new terms. And it's also an opportunity for you to develop new interests and new goals and to pursue them. I don't have to say really the obvious about you may want to travel or take some classes, learn a new skill, maybe even enter a new career or retire. But think about this as an opportunity for yourself to develop something new, and new friends and things like that. I want to offer as a resource something that was very, very helpful to my colleagues and myself. It was a book by an author by the name of Jane Isay. It's called Walking on Eggshells, Navigating the Delicate Relationship Between Adult Children and Parents. She's not a therapist. She's not a clinician. I believe she's a journalist. But she wrote this book, and she gave vignettes of herself and her relationship with her adult children. And also she gave some examples, vignettes of people, I guess, that she had written about and so forth. And, when I mention this to my clients, they say, yeah, that's what it's like a lot talking with our kids. It's really like walking on eggshells. And yeah, it's klutzy. But you know what? Eggshells break. And I used to make nice collages with eggshells. But anyway, it's a clue that something's different. And it's hard to walk on eggshells. Even if they break, it sort of crackles under your feet. But also what the book taught me, reading the book taught me, was sometimes this doesn't happen quickly. It takes time. It's klutzy. It's klutzy to walk on eggshells, and it's klutzy sometimes to navigate these relationships. But keep at it and get the support and think about some of these things that we've talked about. If it's difficult for you to deal with on your own, of course, there's therapy. And that can be really helpful. So I don't know. I guess we're a little bit early on ending, but I'm certainly open to taking questions. Comments would be welcome as well.
They're writing. Someone's writing something.
Okay, somebody, Nita tells me somebody's writing something.
I think it's Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Wait,
What?
what ages are we talking about? 18 and up, or does it start a little later?
Well, 18 is, is the mark, of independence. But as I said, it can start a little bit later. But I think 18 is a good age because they can say what my granddaughter said to my daughter. I don't have to listen to you anymore. They may have to listen to you if you're the one that's supporting you, but technically they don't. So I think, in terms of the meaning of that, we have to look at 18 as being the age that starts. But from there, remember I said I thought that initially when they graduate from high school, and even if they go on to college, they still might be financially dependent on you, and in some ways emotionally dependent on you. So really, I like to think of 18 possibly as a transitional time, but I think it's really helpful to think of them as independent or as adult children at the age of 18.
So, do you find that it's easier or harder? Oh, hold on. It says, oh boy. Do you find that it's easier or harder than young children to get them into therapy as a family or dyad?
It's probably harder because you have control when they're young children. I mean, the young children may not really want to go into therapy, but they have to if you insist. But if your adult children might not want to, it's not uncommon. They may say this is your problem. Sometimes it's better for the adult children to go into their own therapy. But again, this is something, we're therapists. We know that therapy is not going to work unless you want it to work. In cases where, and I worked with, I have worked with people, and I have, and sometimes, if there's, if the adults, if the older, the parents are together, sometimes the husband and wife don't agree about going into therapy together. So we work with what they can do and how they can do it individually to deal with it, but always with thinking about the meanings for the people that they're really concerned about. So, what I can do in therapy is do some role play with them, and they could be the children, and we establish some dialogue that way in terms of, what the parent sees is going on.
So Mary is saying, my 21-year-old son is so lost. He just dropped out of college. He's coming back to live with us. He's mopey and depressive on meds, very smart, but can't figure it out. I can't seem to do tough love, and our whole family is struggling. The one whining mommy. Wait, no, I mixed up two people. Just dropped out of college. He doesn't know what to do next. I'm dreading his coming back to live with us. He's mopey and depressive, very smart, but can't figure it out. I can't seem to do tough love. And our whole family is struggling with what to do with him.
When you say tough love, Mary, what do you mean by tough love?
The therapist has recommended that we don't let him live with us.
Well, I think that may get to be that, you may get to that point, but in terms of tough love, I think about tough love with, your teens at home, and, and there are consequences for taking the car when they're not supposed to take the car, and that kind of thing. I don't think that's going to fly with somebody that's already in their 20s, even though they're still financially dependent. So I think what you can do, though, is that you can set boundaries and conditions. And that the tough love part of it would be that if he's not willing to meet those boundaries or those conditions, then you can give them a time to do that, to meet that situation, and then say that you just can't stay here anymore. The difficulty would be is that is he going to end up on the streets or that kind of thing, or it may force him into doing what he needs to do to get his life in order. This is a great example of what we call a boomerang kid. He is not necessarily a failure to launch, but before you set the boundaries, and I don't know how much you've done with this or not, think about what it is that's going on with him that is making him do this. He may be, having difficulty getting out on his own, and maybe he's doing this to force you to get him out. If he would go into therapy, it probably would be really, really helpful. But of course, you have no control over that. You can suggest it, and you can, there's a lot of things that you can do to reflect with him, which might be difficult when you're feeling really pissed, when he's really stepping on your toes and being moody and aggressive and that kind of thing. But I would say that your therapist, in brief, may be on the right track.
Yeah, Monica is saying, do you have any ideas on how to help someone integrate the aggressively independent person, maybe even borderline E versus the one whining mommy?
Monica, are you talking about the parent or the child?
The child.
So the child is aggressive, and when
Who's 34?
He's 34. Okay. Well, I'm using child in quotes. Anyway, again, if he's aggressive, again, I would do some reflection, which might be difficult, but say, this is really hard to say. This is really hard for me to listen when you talk to me this way. Let's see if we can do this a little differently, because I'd like to understand what's going on with you. And if that's not going to, and give him or her some opportunities to meet you at their level. And then if they don't, again, like with my suggestion to Mary, if this is getting too difficult, and I guess with the whiny mommy, again, it's like, this is really difficult for me. This is when I say difficult for me, I'm saying that this would be what you would be saying to them. I can't talk to you when you talk to me this way. So let's find a way that we can talk as adults about this. With the whiny mommy kind of thing, is this kind of a manipulative thing on the part of the adult child? What do you think is going on with the adult child that is making it difficult for the parent to deal with this? Although I have to say, if I had to deal with a whining mommy or an aggressive kid, this gets difficult too. It's hard.
Yuchun is asking, how can you help the parents to foster financial independence or educational obligation after 18 years old?
Well, start by paying, and this is a really long answer, Yuchun, because as I said, it's probably one of the most complicated. That and the partnering issues are probably the most complicated challenges of parenting adult children. But start by thinking about what kind of messages about money did your child grow up with in your family. And it's helpful to also think about what kind of messages you got growing up, and if you have a partner, what kind of messages your partner grew up, and then talk about that. And think about what you did with your child to deal with money. I mean, was there an allowance or that kind of thing? And then when you think about, then work on a plan, you and your partner. And even if you're not with your partner, with the other parent, make a plan together so that you're pretty much on the same page. It's admittedly a lot more complicated if you're not with your partner and if you're at odds with each other on that one. And that's a whole other issue. But anyway, it's a really long answer. But I think start with the messages that they got, and then work with your adult child and say, look, this is what we're going to do. Many years ago, I was working with a family, and then the adult children stopped coming. It was a very volatile situation. But with one of the children in particular was more volatile, the most volatile, and she was making a lot of demands. But the parents also, out of their desire to not let her have to we just lost, okay, not have her have to leave home. They could not, the time that I worked with them, they were unable to get their backbone together to say, hey, look, you know, these are the boundaries, you want to stay here. These are the conditions that you can live in this house, and we will help you by doing X, Y, and Z. And when you're doing X, Y, and Z, which involves maybe giving them some money and allowance or something like that, there needs to be a time frame on it, and there needs to be some conditions that are set to be met within those time frames, and then stick to the time frame. I mean, unless something happens, there's a terrible accident, and you know they're grossly incapacitated. But all things being equal, to set the boundaries together and say and stick to them.
Just typing something.
Okay. So I hope that's giving you some idea, Yatsen.
Thank you very much for the feedback and valuable information on parenting adult children. Happy holidays. Excellent presentation.
Thank you so much.
Aww.
Okay. How are we doing?
I guess we can wrap it up. If there's no more questions.
Are there any more questions?
Monica's typing, I think.
Is somebody else writing?
Yeah, Monica.
Okay.
Thanks, Nikki and Anita. Oh.
Oh, thank you, Monica, and you're very welcome.
Nadia is also writing.
Okay, we have another question coming or comment?
Question or comment? Mary Kay. Mary Kay, what city do you work in?
Oh, my office is in Encino. Thank you for asking.
What are your best suggestions for dealing with a blended family situation?
Well, first of all, get some good stress reducers. Practice them regularly. Taking some deep breaths and exhaling fully also can really help. You know, and sometimes it can be really helpful to get some outside therapeutic help if it gets really complicated. But I think really separating and agreeing with your partners, and when I say partners, I mean the previous partner and the current partner, on whose is what's is, you know, who belongs to what, and how you're going to deal with that, and again, make your boundaries from that and stick to that. And be clear with yourself and with each other, and communicate as clearly as you can with the adult children what that's all about. I one more word about with blended partners. Sometimes when there's a lot of confusion on the adult child's part and all that, even with when they're young children, I have found that it's always helpful that when you get into a real logjam about some of this, that you just say, you know, this is why, you know, your dad and I are no longer together, because we do have difficulty agreeing on this, and I understand that that's really difficult for you, and I feel supportive in understanding that.
Nadia said thank you.
You're welcome, Nadia.
And it sounds like that may be it.
Okay. It seems like nobody is.
Happy holidays.
So yeah, okay. Nobody seems to be typing, so I'm guessing there are no any more questions. I'm glad this was helpful for some of you, and I hope those of you that will listen afterwards will also find it helpful. Please feel free to call. There is a website, parentingadultchildren.com. Parenting Adult Kids. I'm sorry, parentingadultkids.com, and there's some contact information there. So thank you, and I wish all of you a happy holiday.
Bye, you guys. Happy holidays. The evaluation should come up as soon as we close the presentation. Hope to see you guys in a month at our next webinar. Bye.
Bye.